What's up, guys? It's Friday. It's nice out. I'm hanging out with my good friends, Mike Payne, Paul Van Mater. Let's do it.
Wait. What did you say?
Said
Say my name again. Say my name.
Paul Van Mater.
Van Mater. See, I thought I heard you say it that way in some of the ads you made. It's not Van Mater. It's Van Meter, like a meter stick.
Dude, I just learned that. I thought it was Van Mater this entire time.
I had to rewind. I hit back on my podcast player. I'm like, did he just say Van Mater?
One of my best friends. We're business partners, and he doesn't know how to say my name. I'm sorry.
I love you anyway, buddy.
Hey, what's up, Mike Panye West?
Right. Nick, go Eleanor. Nick, go Eleanor. In the house.
Podcast.
Yes.
What are we talking about today, Paul?
So in all seriousness, we are talking about, I would say, a topic that there's fewer important topics to a shop, and that is estimating, pricing, and quoting.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
If you're not getting that right, you're not going to really getting anything right in your shop, right? If you're bringing in work you're going to lose money or make very low margins, it's just so hard to make traction and have enough money to do things you want to do, grow the company, hire people, market, buy machines. So it all starts with pricing and quoting the right way.
Yep, I can feel that. Yep. I'm sure Mike can feel that pain as well. Mike Panye.
He can feel that Panye as well.
Panye.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, yes, it's absolutely critical. I tell you, and I think most shops screw it up. And the only reason I say that is because, I've bought 5 shops now, and in every case, one of the first things I do is I go look at how we're quoting jobs. And in those 5 cases, it was wrong. And
5 for 5.
And when I've talked to other shops, it's wrong. So I feel real comfortable saying that a majority of the market probably doesn't have this dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember enough about some of those to tell us what was wrong?
Well, I covered one of them a couple of weeks ago on our episode with Mike Fritz, where it's just, so often you're starting with an Excel spreadsheet, and then by the time you're to a copy of a copy of a copy, you might be adding in expenses that aren't really there and pricing yourself out of a job, or you might not be capturing expenses that aren't there, right? So a formula broke, you went from a total to an average.
Or here's one that we've been guilty of in the past, labor rate. We're like, all right, well, we don't know the actual labor rate of the people who are clocked in on that job, so we use a number, and then we're like, oh man, things have changed. Let's add 10% to that number. And then years go by and you're like, now you have this labor rate. That's not even your labor rate. It's just a number you use. Yeah. And we had to rehab from that.
Yeah. I think there's I just think there's a lot of reasons it can go wrong. And especially, I think as a lot of shops start out and, even older shops that maybe haven't gotten into systems that help you with this, you're just using a broken model.
Mm-hmm.
In which, if you're using a broken model, that means everything you estimate and quote is going to be wrong.
Yeah,
you might still hit some fine,
sure,
but you're not going to hit your goal.
You're systemically effed.
Yep. And even if you use a good tool, you can put bad numbers into that tool
100%.
and quote terribly, right? You can 100%. Put low labor rates, low machine rates, the wrong overhead rates,
or high,
high, yeah,
and price yourself out of the job.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think, Paul, that there's anything more important to the profitability, like any lever more important to the profitability of a shop? Because you probably see inside the profitability of more shops than anyone I know,
Sure. I mean, I think this in combination with good job costing, they go hand in hand together. Without knowing your actuals, it's hard to know what to quote in the future for times based on your machines, your resources, your people.
Because it's a cost plus, right? I mean, you're for a job shop, you're figuring out your cost, then putting some sort of a factor in there and trying to make sure.
Typically,
it's a bit different for some of my stuff because we have a market setting the price of the item. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's a list price off MSRP type thing, and we got to back into it from there. So it is. Sure. I think it's definitely. I mean, most of what the Machine Shop MBA is focused on is contract manufacturing, job shops. So, but I'm sure
Absolutely.
we'll touch on
Absolutely.
like product manufacturers as well today.
Yeah. I think there's probably more shops pricing things too low than too high. Both certainly happen. But I think one of the reasons people price things too low is because they're not sales and marketing driven organizations day in and day out. So they don't have enough RFQs coming in. I call that sales pressure. So their sales pressure is too low, not too high, which means they have to quote everything and they got to sharpen their pencil to try to get that work in the door, which is bad for everybody because, you have other shops quoting maybe more appropriately and someone's lowballing everybody and winning that work. And then they might even not deliver it well. And then it's a negative cycle. So this does tie back to, our previous episode of being a sales and marketing driven company, how to make sure you're always focusing on that, even through the busy times. So you have that positive sales pressure, which allows you to be more selective in your quoting. And after this episode, more precise in the cost that you're using as the basis for your estimating.
And even the previous episode, all the way back to the mindset of an entrepreneur and like trying not to operate out of the scarcity mindset and operate out of a more abundant mindset. Like when everything's scarce, to your point, you got to take every possible job you can get because you just got to like survive. And, you'll take jobs you shouldn't really take and you don't have, any leverage because you suck at sales. So, yeah.
So the way I like to start with this is you got to understand where your costs are. And the way I think about it, and we typically think about it, is there's 4 buckets of cost. The first bucket is your direct labor costs, like the people that are actually doing the work. It's the machinists, the programmers, the people in shipping, your CMM programmers, your people that are doing contract review or, order entry, people actually doing that value added type of work. The second would be the cost associated with any resource that they're using, right? Which is very low if there's someone sitting at a desk. And it's very high if they're standing in front of a 5-axis multi-pallet pool, that costs $1 million.
Right.
And it's way less if they're sitting in front of a TL1 that's like 30, 40 grand, right? So that's pretty important because if you quote a single rate because you don't understand the cost of your equipment, you're going to overburden your expensive equipment and you're going to way underburden your less expensive equipment and you won't be evenly distributed across your shop. The next one would be the cost of anything you put into the product in terms of materials, BOM items, outside processes, anything you're cutting tools, anything you're spending money on to help deliver that product that's not labor. And then the last would be your sort of overhead, your SG&A, just your rent, your mortgage, whatever, your insurance, the salespeople's salaries, the owner's salary, all those kind of things that are just kind of overhead expenses. Anything else, Mike, you think that's that I left out?
Not at a bucket level. I mean, there's so many things within each of those.
Of course.
I think that's a really good place to start.
So let's just talk through those. Understanding your direct labor costs. Back in my shop days, we eventually got ourselves into what we came up with this sort of simple way to think about it, this framework. We call it estimating 101, estimating 201, and estimating 301, kind of like college classes. 101 is just quoting a single shop rate, right? It's like this job will take 10 hours. We charge $100 an hour. That's $1,000 job, right?
Right.
And that can work. Especially if your cost is actually less than $100 an hour. And you'd have to do the math to figure out if that's true. But then again, you run into, if you have really discrepant costs to your equipment, you're going to be pricing the expensive equipment too low and the cheap equipment too high.
Yeah.
And you also might lose jobs because let's say there's a bunch of, hand labor to install inserts or do something at a bench. You don't necessarily need to charge $100 an hour for someone to sit there installing inserts or doing deburring. But you certainly should charge more than $100 an hour for your big 5-axis pallet pool. So anyway, so that's 101. So 201 would be where you break out your labor costs from your overhead costs, right? So instead of just a single rate, you're like, okay, my general overhead rate is $50 an hour, and my labor rate all burden. And remember, when you start breaking out labor, you got to do a fully burdened labor rate. If you pay someone $30 an hour, you do not want to put in $30 an hour for your labor, right? Because you it costs more to employ that person than
Can
just
we
what you
give
pay
like
them on their paycheck.
5 examples of what goes into that fully burdened labor rate besides the hourly wage?
Yes. So you've got their payroll taxes, you've got their benefits. I don't know if I can name 5, but,
or whatever. You really need to come up with 5, Mike, because I said 5.
Right. Yeah, and I know in a lot of businesses, and of course, it's going to vary state by state, et cetera. But it's it's roughly, if you don't know that and you don't want to break it all down, lots of times people throw somewhere between 25 and 30% premium on what someone makes, right? So if they're making $30 an hour, you're going to bill them out at you're going to consider their fully loaded rate at 40.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. You're going to take a third of that essentially, or $38, maybe something like that. So.
Yep. That seems about right, Mike. That's
what we did. Is like,
thought of it.
I just have heard. I don't do this in the operations side of our business, but I've heard like add 30% to that. So.
Right. So you basically then have two cost buckets that you're putting in. Now this is assuming that your material, your outside processes, your BOM items, those are separate, right? You hopefully you're getting quotes from your vendors, and you're putting that pricing in and marking that up an appropriate amount.
One quick question: so like what if like the gloves and like they're not like tools for the job necessarily, but they're like general supplies and tools and things like that. Does that get typically clustered into burden then? Like just general shop supplies?
I think that's the way, general overhead.
Okay, got it.
Costs,
cool. Anyway, keep going.
And then 301 would be where you're breaking out your direct labor costs and your direct overhead costs, where you have specific, sometimes people call it like activity-based estimating, where based on the activity and the work center or resource that's being used for that activity, that comes with its own separate rate. And that's where you can really get, we think that's the smartest way, because you can quote your helical, installation at X rates for someone sitting at a bench. You can quote your, turning off the backside of something on your manual lathe or your simple little TL1 at a different rate, but you're quoting, your $1 million 5-axis machine at an appropriate rate for that type of equipment.
Yeah. So when you're a garage shop with one type of machine and like kind of one type of job, and it's a lot easier, right? Because you don't have to figure out, okay, I got my big expensive 5-axis mill, or I got my little small lathe or whatever. Is that where you see people start to like get off course? Is it when they start to add like a different style of machine that was a different level of investment, and or maybe take different work that has unique processes to the job that kind of like started their business?
Yeah, I think that's often the kind of path that takes. So I would recommend that even a small shop with very similar types of equipment that are cost about the same should definitely go through the exercise, because this, once you really kind of sit down and think about it, use ChatGPT if you need to, look up some resources. It's actually not that hard to figure out kind of where your cost buckets should be, and then just build that into your simple spreadsheet, right? Yeah. And at least you've started from the beginning doing it that way. So if you have, the type of machine that you're choosing for a machining operation, and it has an associated, hourly cost with it. If you're using your manual mill, it's one thing. If you do your new horizontal you just bought, that's a different number, right? Instead of just using that one flat rate for everything.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly 301 is going to dial you in the best. I will say though, like I run somewhere between a 101 and a 10 or 201, right? Like, so
okay.
And the reason that is for me, and this relates right back to what Paul was saying, is, I bought a shop. Every shop I've bought, this equipment's already, fully depreciated and amortized, right? So I don't necessarily have this change in like that resource cost, right? Like it's a little different than if I was dropping in $500,000 machines 2 times a year, and then I have some $100,000 machines and all that, and I think one of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, but something maybe that's appropriate to include here is like, to me also in some ways, so if I invest in robotics, like I don't quote that it's running lights out. I don't give my customer necessarily that benefit. I act like someone's going to be standing there running it 10 hours a day for however long it takes to get this job done. because the money I save with the lights out operation of that is paying me back my investment in the robotics.
Sure.
Now, if I want to get super competitive, then we do, right? So there have been times where like, oh, this job would be perfect. We can automate it. It can run 20 hours a day. Bid it at, a third of the shop rate.
Right.
Something like that. So there's a lot of little
So you
levers.
just take your overall rate and just slice it down a bit.
Yeah, we'll just take the labor of that operation. If it's not the whole part, let's just say it's one lathe opera, right? I mean, and of course, using ProShop, we can go into that operation, right? And say,
put a lower labor rate,
right,
or labor percentage.
But that makes sense, like intuitively.
That's just if we want to get super competitive. Otherwise, because that robot may not always be available too, right? So if it comes in next time and the robot's not available, and I've got to run it manually, I want to make sure I'm not losing money on that job in that instance.
Yeah, think of like a contractor you hire to do something at your house or whatever, right? If this person's very experienced, they've done it a lot, and they're advanced in what they do, they might be able to do a job in half the time of the next guy. Why should they make half as much? So like your shop is advanced because it's running lights out. Like why should you lose because of that? You should win because of that.
Yeah. So I think there's a balance there. I did a really excellent podcast with Marvin Rodriguez from Shop True Precision down in California, and then he actually came and spoke at the workshop that I did a couple months ago about winning more profitable work. And they have very successfully moved from just a low volume, high mix job shop to really a production contract, multi-year, LTA type of shop. And they've done that through very smart pricing strategies. And when they're quoting a job that is going to be, a long-term running, be on the machine for days or weeks on end, where it's not a robot, but it's like maybe in a pallet pool.
Yeah.
And they know that it's, let's say it's an hour of cycle time, but there's only 15 minutes of direct labor cost associated with that part to load it, deburr it, inspect it, put in some helicoils, whatever it might be. They are definitely representing, their actual cost structure with what it's going to cost them to make those parts, and then adding the margin they want to have on that. And it's been a super successful strategy.
Now, are they fully transparent with their customer? Are they sharing that, like opening the kimono and saying, here's exactly the margin we're making on your jobs?
I couldn't tell you. We didn't get into that level, I don't think.
We get asked, it's always a slippery slope with that, because once they know, then they just try to push your margin as their margin, that they could be getting you on, right? So it's like, it's always tough to, how much do you want to disclose with the customer?
Yeah, I've definitely had other clients that are completely transparent in certain cases. So I had an example of one, Chad Vanderbeek from Hibschman Precision, where once he got ProShop, he realized that he was way upside down in some long running parts that they made. And so not only did he realize they were upside down, right around that time, his customer asked for an RFQ and gave them target pricing lower than their current pricing.
Oh, gosh.
And so he came back to them fully expecting he was going to lose this business. And he's be like, he pulled up ProShop. He's like, here's what it cost me to make your parts. Here's what I pay for material. Here's how much machine time it is. Here's my labor. Here's my overhead. I need to charge you this amount. And I think it was like a 30% increase or something. And fully expecting that work would go away. But several days later, he got a PO for the new price. And it's now a profitable job, and it's not a drag on his business anymore.
That's awesome. Good for him.
So
we've had several similar instances to that. I mean, that, when I talk about, like, especially early on when we've had some of these new shops, and we realized pretty quickly the pricing's off, and you can't just send like a blanket, like, hey, I'm the new owner, and here's a new pricing that's gone up on average 25% on every part we make for you, right? Like that's not going to go over well. So, we've had to go in and say, look, here's, we ran all this one time in a good system that we actually know what it costs. Your price hasn't changed for 8 years. Here's what it costs today. And it's been much better accepted than just a blind, like, I'm going from $82 a part to 97, right? They're like, whoa, where'd that come from? But if you show them, they get it. I mean, it's in their best interest for you to be profitable, right?
If it's a good a good customer that's sort of partnering with you and not just shopping for the lowest penny, no matter what.
Sure.
Which is the kind of customers we all want, and the kind of customers you can have when you have positive sales pressure and you're always doing sales and marketing.
Correct.
Yeah, it's. I think I know you said it, and we'll probably say it a few times throughout the episode, but I think that can't be over explained. It's this episode's about estimating and quoting. Why are they talking about sales? It's like we have a current customer who was threatening us with all this volume, and they've got this target price that we're just not attracted to at all. They're like, yeah, but we could quadruple the business we're giving you. And it's like, well, we have options right now. There's, we make conveyors for machine tools. So a lot of people know that, right? So there's a lot of European companies who are like, because of tariffs and things like that, wanting a North American strategy. They're reaching out to us. Hey, we used to bring the machines in with conveyors, but now we want to do as much as we can domestically. And so we have a lot of options, and we put, here's our best offer to you. And, one of our customers wants to go way below that. And they're like, yeah, but think about the volume. And it's like, you're just going to give me a bigger problem. Like, it's soak up all the capacity. I won't be able to go after any of these other guys that would be great customers, more of a partner type customer. So it's like, yeah, if all you think about is order bookings, you can just like get delusional and just not even realize you're killing your business.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I wanted to just stress this point for a second. I think there's also, we've mentioned it already, but there's definitely shops that don't actually understand how much it costs them for running a machine and for an hour. My good friends over at EBITDA Growth Systems, Dave and Mike, I know they tell a story of engaging with a shop who had beautiful equipment, like 5-axis, top-end stuff, aerospace, defense type work. He was charging $65 an hour, I think is what they said.
Oh gosh.
Right. And he's in like,
can I get that guy's number?
He was afraid to charge more because he was afraid to not win bids. And it just like gone down this sort of negative spiral to where he was just like, quoting well below his cost, just barely scraping by, losing money and it's like, no, dude, like this equipment, the market rate, what you're doing, the level of quality that you put out, that's like $200 an hour work, easy.
Yeah. If he's doing it for 65, like we'll start farming a lot of stuff out to him.
You're a terrible customer, Nick.
Just trying to, look, if he wants to do it.
Yeah. Everyone's attracted by a low price, but it comes at a cost somewhere. So anyway, if your shop is in that position, definitely understand your costs, make sure you are charging what it's worth. You're in the business to make money and you should be charging a fair price.
So would you recommend so there's kind of two elements here. Understand the market rate for that type of equipment. You can figure that out without knowing anything about your cost.
Well, it is kind of the market rate.
Yeah. So a high, precise 5-axis mill over a certain size is going to have kind of a competitive market rate in your area or in that industry segment or whatever. So would you recommend even if you can just be competitive with the rate, start with figuring out your costs? Like if you're not dialed in on your costs, start there.
I think that is critical. Yeah. And Mike, I saw there was a LinkedIn post this morning. Someone was asking about the cost of a truck, or maybe that was yesterday. And you were like, this is what equipment costs. Like your purchase costs minus your getting rid of it at the end, plus your maintenance costs and your operating costs. That's your total cost of ownership. So you basically got to do something similar with your machines. What does it cost you to buy it? What does it cost you to get rid of it, 20 years later or 10 years later? How many years will it be in use? How many hours per year are you going to have it running? So you need the denominator to divide in all the actual costs, what depreciation you'll have, insurance, taxes. And Mike, I'd love your thoughts on, like, do you put in the floor space that a machine takes? Do you put in the actual electricity it takes? Or is that just more general overhead?
You goes in that bucket? I don't think you have to dial in that tight on what we do. I mean, you certainly could, right? Like you could look at your electricity bill and your cost of space and break it down, but that's probably a little detailed, honestly.
Yeah. I might say if you have something that's really different than everything else, like you have a heat treating oven and that just consumes electricity.
Sure.
you might want to make sure you kind of understand that cost and put that into the cost you charge for heat treating.
I'll give you an example of that's similar to that I think, again, this is something you should think about. So our target tooling costs across our shop is 4% of revenue.
Okay.
And actually I know that's pretty decent because of like the Top Shop circuit, right? Like that if you can stay around 4% of revenue, you're performing with the Top Shops award winners that, we've talked to. And so that's our target. That's where we try to stay. So like we don't go in and add tooling costs to a job at 4%. That's built into my overhead. If we're bidding a job that is Inconel and we need a new drill just for that job, then we build in those tooling costs, right? So if we're going to have excess tooling costs, we build that in, right? So if you go to your like electricity example, if it's just one of my machines, it's not necessarily using any more electricity than another machine. If I had a heat treat oven that
makes sense.
Then I need to build
that makes sense.
In, right?
Yeah. If it's mining Bitcoin, then
yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned when you have an unusually high cost for something. Yeah, if you're going to be going through, and insert every single part on some crazy Hastelloy, you got to charge separately for that.
And it's it's really no different than I think again when you start really getting into there are jobs. So we expect about a 1% scrap rate we estimate into all of our jobs. That again, that's kind of based on the Top Shop's benchmark of well performing. You're gonna lose somewhere around, I think it's like 1 in 120 parts. Like you could expect something's going to happen.
Sure.
So that we use that as our baseline. If it's super difficult, it's got a plus or minus, half at that, or 0.2 or something like that with an 8 surface finish. Maybe we're going to think we're going to have a 3% scrap rate, 5% scrap rate. There's other parts based on history. We know we're going to have a 25% scrap rate. Just what it is. And so we bid that in. So again, if it's baseline, don't worry about it. Right. If there's something abnormal, then take that into account.
Yeah, no, that's great. And whether or not you go, like we have a spreadsheet that helps you calculate your machine burden rate, and it has spots for electricity or coolant and other consumables that's not cutting tools. So whether you plug it into there or it goes into your overhead cost, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter a ton. You just need to have that factored in. Because if you're not factoring that in, it's coming right off your bottom line.
And just for the listeners, we'll put that spreadsheet in the newsletter and in the resources section of our website so that you can find it for yourself.
You just gave me some homework, Nick. Thank you.
And Jen got some homework too. Sorry.
I was like, now I got to find that worksheet.
I'm just trying to love on our audience here. Some people are like, hey, I wish I could see that.
Yes. Lots of people have no idea where to start with that. And I'll just touch on that for 1 second longer. That rate, because it's based, you have your costs. That rate per hour is based on how many hours per year you actually get out of that machine, which underscores the importance of either unattended running or having a second shift or both. Because if you can take the same dollar figure and divide it, 3 ways instead of 1 way, that rate is much, much lower, right? And you can be more competitive, win more work, and you're not losing money on that because you have a lower rate. You just have a lower cost because you're getting better utilization out of your equipment.
Paul, you don't even realize you just did another homework assignment for me because you just made the ad for Lights Out. That's like exactly what we talk about on our show.
Yeah,
well, and I think along that lines, I think something that's important to think about, and I'm actually helping a 2-person shop right now kind of work through this. They had reached out after one of our episodes and when they called me, they said, man, we're just not winning enough work. And like when we're bidding this, we're bidding it, they're bidding somewhere between $90 and $100 an hour or something like that. And I wouldn't say they have, like unique equipment that's pushing that high value. Right. And my first questions are like, well, let's look at your cost structure, right? So like they share the QuickBooks screen and we're looking at it, and the reality is they're fully loaded labor and direct and indirect overhead, and I mean it's $25 an hour less than mine.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I've got certifications, and I've got a lot of stuff they don't have.
Right.
So in some cases, we'll play that to your advantage too, right?
Mhm.
Like you can charge $25 an hour less than I charge
Sure.
for the same work. Now, again, maybe it doesn't come with a cert. It doesn't come with, some of the things I bring to the table. But, when you're starting out, when we're talking about this MBA series and like you're starting a shop maybe, or you're in early stages, like take some of this to your advantage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can do it cheaper than I can do
Mhm.
it.
Right.
So charge less.
So I'm curious, they were saying they weren't winning enough work, but yes, their cost structure is pretty low. What did you come up with at the end of the day?
So we actually did kind of work towards, and interestingly enough, I'd followed up with him yesterday just to see if he's noticing a difference. And so he started dropping that rate about $20 an hour on stuff they were bidding, and they're having success.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Now, and there's that balance between, do I do cost plus pricing or do I do value pricing? Right. I mean, there is that element, and there's a lot to think about there. But if you're just struggling getting into work, like find where your advantage is. In their case, their advantage was that they can do a lot of the same type of work I can do, not as much as I can do because I've got 20 times as many machines as they have. Right.
Yeah.
But they can do a lot of the same type of work at $20 an hour less. Go start picking off that low hanging fruit.
Sure. And they're probably competing with shops that also have similar cost structures, no certs and stuff. So the rates you can charge are just lower. So if they're charging 80 instead of 100, they're going to win a greater percentage of that work.
Right.
Did you talk about the percentage of work that they're actually winning? I think that's something that we should talk about here.
Well, and one other thing, just to go back to sales real quick. So the difference between 80 and 100, and like people think about, can I afford a salesperson? Well, if you have way more pipeline and you win some percentage at 100, and that's all, like, let's say you only have 5 opportunities and you got to drop it to 80 so you can win more of it and fill your capacity. Like, well, maybe there's your justification for hiring someone in a sales role, because you'll get more at that 100 if you just have more potential customers. But not to derail it and think about sales all the time, but it is a real factor.
For sure.
We did talk a little bit about that, Paul, but one of the reasons they reached out is they felt like their pricing was wrong because their win rate was so low.
Do you know what the rate was?
I don't know the percentage, but it was not much.
What do you think is a healthy win rate percentage?
Across every industry I've ever worked in, it's one of the first things I look at. And I'll give you the opposite. It's an example. I went in to help somebody turn around like this construction company that was just losing them money every month. And I go in, and one of the first meetings I had was with the sales team, and they're like, "Oh, we're awesome." And they're bragging about that they win 100% of their jobs.
That's a super big red flag. Like,
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a huge red flag, right? I was like, okay, well, show me how you price this. So they show me their Excel spreadsheet that they're pricing these jobs. And I said, okay, where are you getting this cost structure, right? Like, where are you getting this labor rate? Where are you getting this material rate? Well, it's an estimate across what we do. Like, okay. So now I go dig into those numbers. Well, the going rate in this particular industry was, real quickly, I found out that the going rate was 30 to 35. They were bidding 25.
Of course they win.
And it wasn't because they were smaller and had a lower overhead. When you dug in, their rates were 24 a foot to do this, right? So they were so underpriced that they were winning everything.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, right? If you're not winning anything, that's a problem. What's the right number? I think it really varies. I mean, I'm somewhere around 40%. I feel comfortable there. I mean, of course you'd like to win more, but I feel like we price things right, that's a good number for us. And sometimes, don't be scared to do this either. There's jobs that we quote that we're like, we really don't want this, and maybe we've even no quoted it twice, and they keep coming back. It's like, okay, fine. Quote it at a price that we'll be happy if we get it.
Yeah.
Right. And we quoted at a price will be, and we get it.
Sure.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, we didn't want this job, but we got it now, and it's going to be really
there is a price where you're like, all right, I guess we do want it,
Yeah, we'll give that a shot.
But I think the general takeaway for this point we're making is to be more concerned. There's this misconception that like too low of a win rate is the problem, when I think often too high of a win rate is the alarming thing.
Too if you're over, I would venture to say if you're over 60 to 70% win rate, you're not charging enough.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're under 40, you're probably charging too much.
Yep.
Or your lead times are off or something like that. There's something about
sure
the value prop.
And it is important I think it's an important practice to follow up with your customers that you didn't win. I mean, follow up, like that's just something you should always do, follow up on your quotes, and then find out why. If they say, no, we didn't do it, find out why, put it in a spreadsheet, put it in a database, so you can start understanding why you're losing work, whether it's lead time or price or something else.
In our business, the closed lost reason, to go back to the CRM thing, the closed lost reason right now, there's a pie chart of all those reasons, and the biggest slice of the pie is that it expired. Because we have to quote so many things at Goldner. There's just so much stuff that comes in, and when it expires, it's like we just didn't get an answer after 90 days. We didn't follow up enough, and so like a strategic initiative is to close that slice of the pie, because we just didn't learn anything from expired. We need that reason. Right. And you made a point, Mike, about, well, maybe it's your lead time. There's so many other elements to the value proposition than just the price. And if you get really fast, you can be really profitable. Like speed, it cannot be overstated. If you're really, really fast, you can be extremely profitable, even if you don't have the highest level of equipment or anything like that. Like people will pay for speed.
We have two newer customers that, for the most part, and you can tell if they email us directly or if they blind copy us. What we found is on the blind copy ones, the PO often goes to the first to respond.
Bingo.
If they email us direct, the price doesn't matter, right? It matters, but
that's like deep insight that really provides value to your company. And I was talking about like after you've quoted what lead time you're quoting, but you made another point that may be even more important: how fast you quote. Like, do you really think everyone goes out for 10 quotes?
This is on our agenda.
Yeah, okay. All right,
so I'm glad you brought it up. And this is something that our friends over at Paperless Parts talk about all the time, right? Using software like theirs. If you can be incredibly fast, return that quote instantly or within a half an hour or an hour, you are much more likely to win that with a really good margin tacked onto it. So sometimes buyers are just in such an urgent rush to get a project off their desk that literally, if it's within any reasonable ballpark, the first one to come in, they're like, okay, good, here's the PO, done. I got to move to my next thing. So that speed to quote, it could not be understated how important that is. It could be a real lever for profitability in your business.
I don't know if everybody does this, but put that in perspective. Like lots of times when I think about how my customers think, I try to think how I think, right? So we've estimated a job. We estimated material maybe off of a hard quote or an online quote, whatever. Let's say we were planning this job to be $500 material, and we reach out to whatever customer to buy that aluminum, and it's $490. It's in my budget. We just move forward, right? We don't necessarily check that pricing with 5 vendors every time we run the job.
Sure.
Right. So like back to Paul's point, if that buyer already has a budget, like, hey, if these parts are $150 a piece, we're good. They can respond to the one that's $148 real quick. Right. Now, if you come in at $160, now they're going to wait on the next one that comes in closer to $150. Right. And so, there's definitely a speed element that I think is really important. And the more you can find out on the front end, if there is a target price, there's a budget. That obviously comes with a deeper relationship and those types of things. But
we have a saying that it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. And we say it all the time at our company. That should be like our little social post for LinkedIn or whatever, because it's so true.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing I wanted to make sure we talk about is, before we get into sort of the feedback loop and job costing and using data of how it actually went, maybe this is related. especially as you move up the food chain and you start having certs, you start having CMMs, you got to do contract review, you have just more complex things happening. It's important to make sure you're charging for those costs. A quote is not just your setup and runtime and your material, right? It is what does it cost you to do that final inspection process, prepare that document package, do a thorough contract review. Like you've got to, even prepping for shipping, like there's so many little cost buckets that happen all through the value stream of making a product that it's fair and reasonable to put some cost associated with that. So that's just another thing that I think a lot of shops are leaving money on the table with, not charging what should be a more fair rate to them. And there's this thing that I call the cost shift burden. If you are not putting a cost in and charging it to your customers, it is coming out of your pocket somewhere else. Like full stop, it costs you X amount of money in a month to run your business. And if you're not covering that with what your revenue is, it is coming out of your bank account ultimately. So you got to charge what it costs.
And super simple example of that kind of as we dug in, we're like, we need to charge for that. We charge for customer supplied material. I still got to put somebody on a forklift to unload their truck, bring it in, handle that material. No different than if I bought the material, right? Like,
sure,
there's still time associated with that. So we have a kind of a flat rate. If it's customer supplied material, that goes in our material costs as to cover our expense of doing it.
Yep.
It's not a ton of time. It's not a ton of money, but over the course of 2,000 jobs a year, it adds up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Good. So let's talk a little bit about that closing the loop on job costing, because I do think that's really crucial. So years ago at my shop, we started this process called Kill the Losers. I think I've mentioned it before.
You sound like a bully, Paul.
Yeah. Well, it sounds terrible. The idea is you got to kill the jobs that are dragging down the profitability of your business, right? The Pareto principle applies here. There are 20% of your jobs that are causing 80% of your losses, which is a huge drag on your total bottom line.
Yep.
So if you can identify those, close the loop on that, feed that back into estimating, and not keep losing that work, that's going to make a huge difference in the overall profitability of your business, which allows you to do more things, give better pay to your employees, have better retention, buy better equipment, buy new equipment, do marketing, hire a sales or marketing person. Like all this takes money, and the money comes from profitability on every single job.
Yeah, I was like typing an email like, we got to kill the losers to some other people at our business here, because there's some certain types of jobs, every time we take it, we call them projects that never end, because there's just like one thing after another. Like we should have never got ourselves into this rock and a hard place job,
Absolutely. And that either can come from a few different places. It can come from just someone making a mistake in estimating on what it actually is going to take, or it can come from not having enough sales pressure. So you take something you really know is not a great fit, and then it ends up just being a terrible catastrophe all the way along.
Or I think in our case, it's like, well, we've always done that type of work, so we have to continue to do that type of work because that's who we were. And who you were doesn't need to be who you are and who you're going to be. So sometimes you have to, like, for me, again, not a job shop, more of a product manufacturer. Like, we don't have to sell the same products we used to sell. Like, if they start to suck because the world changed, why are we doing it? Break up with that terrible, toxic ex-girlfriend and move on,
Sure.
So.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the process just very quickly that we use, we would, pull up the jobs that shipped in that week or that month, whatever, however frequency you're doing it, sort it by, least profitable at the top, on your spreadsheet or your database, whatever. And that is assuming you have good inputs, right? Of course. So this, more even foundational than that, make sure you are recording what you're spending on things, make sure your employees are tracking time. And if you have a hard time getting them to accept that, really just sit down and talk about it. It's not about a big brother thing. It's about making sure the business is strong, which helps everyone do better, right? So there's no like finger pointing, you took too long on this, it's your mistake. It's like, no, we need to understand how the business runs, which jobs are good, which jobs are not. Always bring it back to systems, right? If something took too long, it's because the system didn't support it going better. right? Whether that's training, equipment, I quoted it wrong. I got plenty of examples of jobs that I absolutely just screwed up the quote. I thought it would take 20 minutes and it took 60 minutes a piece, right? And that was a legitimate, fair cycle time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the programmer made a mistake or the machinist did something wrong. That was on me, right? So, and then you basically make the decision once you know the least performing jobs. Do you actually look at your cost structure and raise the price to something fair and hopefully go to them and say, sorry, we underquoted this before. This is a new fair price that we need to charge from now on. You might get it again. You might not get it in. But if you don't, it's probably better because you can make room for more profitable work.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it means that if you're like, oh my gosh, every job for this customer is a loser, maybe that's not a good customer for you. Right? Their needs are too high. They're just, they keep rejecting things when it's not on the drawing, whatever it might be, right? Sometimes that's the case.
You could do that by customer, or by, like, if you're a product manufacturer, like maybe stop making that product or stop doing that type of machining. If you're a job shop, like, just don't do that anymore, because every single time you do, you screw it up, or figure out how to get better at it. But I think if you never look at the losers, you never figure out who's the biggest loser. So, and we all know it's Paul.
That's right. That's me all the time. And that exercise, quite honestly, can help you also figure out your niche.
Yeah.
Like, what are you actually really good at? And then go target and market and find more of that type of work.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing it back to marketing and sales.
And I'm even looking ahead on, like, our agenda here, and it's going to be about marketing and sales to some respect in the next part too. Like how to use this quoting and estimating as a way to kind of like kick the tires on a new customer and figure out what's a good job, what's going to be a bad customer, almost like that first date, see if there's some red flags here. It's not worth a second date type deal. So maybe go on to speak on that a little bit, Paul, like how you can use quoting to vet things out.
Yeah. So hopefully if you're doing sales and marketing, you're getting these opportunities with new prospects, hopefully all the time. And very likely they're going to offer you a much smaller project or a quote to start with. They're not going to throw a ton of eggs in your basket all at once. So that's a good opportunity to really kind of, first of all, understand what they're asking for. I think a lot of mistakes happen when you get a new customer and you don't truly understand what they're wanting, and you have different expectations or make assumptions, and then we know what assuming, that makes an ass out of you and me, right? When you assume. So
and Mike
it's a good time to...
He becomes an ass.
And Mike Fun. Good time to, really like spend a few minutes talking to them about their needs, about their way they do inspection or receiving or paperwork, and just make sure you understand all that and communicate that down the line. But then, you can, sharpen your pencil a little bit, but let them know, like, hey, normally I might be a little more, but I really want to win your business, and I'm sharpening my pencil this time, and see how it goes.
It's a lot like a first date. Like the first date, you might try to get those deal breaker questions out of the way, like just see it. Like, I think both sides are doing that too. So like they might give you a really challenging first job to see, like, this isn't the norm. Like, we'll give you a lot of softballs over the plate, but like beach balls over the plate, I think is the word. But this isn't the norm, but like if you can handle this one, we know you're going to be good. And then vice versa on the other way. Like if their demands are outrageous, maybe you don't even want to quote them again. So you kind of have to have that like first quote understanding that this is like, the prototyping phase of the relationship, if you will. It's going to be a little bit more challenging than it might be moving forward.
Yeah, I have. So there's one thing in kind of this customer selection, filtering out stuff. One thing I would say people should really, really pay attention to, because I talk to a lot of shops that get themselves in trouble on this. If you cannot absorb their standard net 90 terms that you're not going to negotiate, be real careful, right? I mean, because you're going to put 2 weeks, 2 months of work into something that you're not going to get paid on for maybe another 90 days. Think about that, right? Like you could go bankrupt because you're out of cash in the amount of time it took from you to ship their parts to get paid. So you really you really do need to think about that. Yeah, you want that big shiny client, but if you can't afford them, don't over leverage yourself to serve them, right? So that's one thing. The other thing too, I know, and everybody talks about this, and this is going to be a little bit of a contrarian view, but I 100% agree that like the riches are in the niches, but don't be scared to push your niche either. So one of the things we've done at Hill, I'd say in the last 8 years, is we've kind of become known as the shop that'll do anything. Like, we don't say no very often, and I know common logic is to say no to stuff that's not a perfect fit, right? Because you're not going to be as profitable. The best example I can give you is just a little over a year ago, a new customer reached out to us for some work that was not right in our alley. I felt like we could do it, but it definitely was not something we had done before. And my entire team wanted to say no to it. And I pushed us and we've done, in the last 12 months, we've probably done $1.3 million with that client now.
Wow.
And expanded beyond the one thing that I wasn't sure that nobody was sure we could do.
Yeah, you have to push yourself out of the comfort zone sometimes,
Yeah, if you have the capability to do it, again, it may not be your niche. Don't ignore that opportunity. This was obviously, has become a major client of ours.
And you make margin, you make good margin on it.
And we make tremendous margin on it. Back to what I said earlier, lots of times when we do take something that it's not our thing, like we really don't, like it's going to be work. That's where we say, okay, price it to where we'll be happy if we do it. So we do make money on it. They're impressed because everybody else they talk to no bid them. And we start getting the other work, right? So yeah, we get that one really difficult job that we don't love. It's like, oh no, we got to make these again. But we get, in the meantime, the once a year that rolls around, we've got 50 other jobs going with them that are in our wheelhouse that we wouldn't have had we not pushed ourselves.
Mike, we used to not power generation enclosures and fuel tanks at one point wasn't Hennig's thing.
Right. And now it's your biggest.
It's our biggest thing by 5x, and it's we found a niche. We sucked at it at first, like most people do when they try something new.
And now
we're the biggest in North America for that,
Right.
And it's like as you're talking, I'm like, if we would have been like, well, that's not what we do. It's a balance. There's tension between like stick to your niche and core competency, but also like stretch yourself and get out of your comfort zone sometimes. So
that particular customer I was talking about from a year ago, that is actually now a specialty of ours. And that welding and fabrication work we do in that arena, we are now getting inquiries from all over the country because we're good at that.
You invested in becoming good at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The first few jobs were not winners, right? Like, because we had to learn and teach, and we, eventually we bought some equipment, and it was, but it opened up a whole new revenue stream for us that didn't exist
before. You can't
kill
all of the losers. Some of us have to survive,
Right.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because one of the forks when you do that process is reinvest in the process to make it profitable. Right?
Sure.
You're like, we see the potential here. We know how much demand they have. They've said it's X amount of dollars or units or whatever. It's like, if we can buy the right equipment or change the process or do some training or figure out better fixturing and do more lights out, like we could actually make a good margin on this. Let's do that.
Yeah. And that, to your point there, that same customer, when I met with them a couple months ago, said, by summer, can you guys be geared up to go 3 to 5 times the volume you did last year? So yes. Right.
Yes.
We're not there. And, and that's the conversation at that point. Well, I couldn't do that today, but yeah, you're giving me 6 months notice. Yeah. Now I can invest in the people and the equipment and all that to hopefully match those volumes.
Yeah.
And so, that could potentially be a massive revenue stream for my companies that a year and a half ago just didn't even exist. We didn't even know it existed.
That's how it was for us with the, like if it was to make one fuel tank or one enclosure for an engine, that's going to go to some random place. But like we knew that this data center boom was coming and we wanted to be a part of it. So that's why we were a loser for a few years. And now, then you figure out how to stop sucking and get awesome.
It's no longer a loser. It's a winner.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been a good conversation. I think as we wrap up, and I want to challenge people to do 2 things. Go analyze your coding process, right? Making sure that you truly understand where your costs are, right? You work with your bookkeeper, work with your CPA, whatever. It's like, this is my overhead costs. These are the number of hours I typically, can generate in a year with my people and my equipment. That's how you start dividing into what your overhead cost is. per hour, making sure that the direct labor you're charging is, with that 30% on top of it for all those French benefits. If you go watch the French benefits, anyone? No, doesn't ring a bell.
Sounds like something I shouldn't Google.
You should Google it. It was a FedEx
like
ad
a French
years
kiss?
ago, and it was a FedEx ad years ago, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Okay, yeah,
that one went right over my head.
French benefits FedEx.
I will Google
that on YouTube.
We'll put it in the resources if you subscribe to the newsletter. Now that I know it's appropriate, it is safe for work.
It is safe for work. Yeah. Adding that 30% to your labor, really understanding, what each machine or work center that you have costs you, and then make sure you're charging, upcharging on your actual costs of out of pocket for materials and stuff, an appropriate amount. I think I do want to caution people. Sometimes people put way too much margin on their materials and they lose a job that could be a great job, but they marked up the material 50% or something, which, just wasn't smart. Sure. So do that. Go audit one of your jobs, right? Go look at a job that recently shipped, and hopefully you have the data to back up, good labor data, good machine time data, out of pocket costs, and just see what it looked like, right? And then start that routine, start that process of doing that regularly.
Yeah, and then we brought up a few things that would be like more on the commercial side or the sales and marketing side too. So like, understand if you have a pipeline, like instead of just 5 key accounts that you take care of, like build a pipeline so you can be more choosy. Another thing we brought up is knowing the reason you lose, and actually like making sure you're tracking that and knowing your rate, like how often you lose. So some things that are easier to do if you have a CRM. We brought that up in prior episodes. These are other reasons to get a CRM going. There's some free, easy to start with CRMs like HubSpot too. So.
Yep. And then I'll just throw one more in there. Mike, you and I talked about it in an episode that'll be coming out soon on my show. Mike Fritz and Kirk have talked about it on their show. Go visit your customers and ask them about the work they have, right? Yep. Mike, you talk about, visiting a customer that didn't realize you did machining work and another one that didn't realize you did fabrication work.
Right.
And you could like double the revenue with that customer just by letting them know what you do, asking them if they have more work, what jobs are, a headache for them, how can you be a partner? And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit just by nurturing those existing customers.
Yeah, some of this stuff is hard. Some of it's easy.
They already like doing business with you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like use that as fully as you possibly can.
And then one last thing, like we don't all get this right in our own businesses. We're here trying to preach to ourselves as much as we are to our audience. Like as we're listening, I'm thinking, man, I got to get better at this. We got to get better at that. I'm sure you guys are feeling the same way. So
I send a lot of these episodes to my own manager.
I send it to myself.
Hey,
don't be a hypocrite.
We just talked about something we should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this is all really
doing
good
a better
stuff.
job of.
And Paul, like you've been beating this drum for a while, so thanks for leading the episode because you guys are really killing it with making sure your customers understand that this is probably the number one lever that you could pull for profitability as a machine shop. So.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. So then next time we're talking about managing orders from contract to completion. So that'll be a fun episode.
Yeah, probably a couple.
That'll probably be a 2-parter.
Oh crap! I got an order. What now?
That's a big elephant.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you can't quote jobs in the right way, you're not making chips.
If you're not making chips,
not making money.
Bam.